Yes, hello, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm going to present to you briefly this guide that was prepared together with the Inter-American Commission on Women. The guide is called Guide on Violence, Gender-Based Violence Against Women and Children. Let's see a brief summary. We're going to talk about the structure, about the basic concepts, about cyber violence, about regional advancement, and also measures on cybersecurity and response. So, which is the background of this guide? Cyber violence is a problem that affects women disproportionately, women and young girls. And there are different statistics, but for instance, 73% of women have suffered online violence. And also the UN Special Rapporteur said that at least 23% of women have experienced online harassment at least once in their life. And this has become even worse with the pandemic. The more women are and young girls are online, the risk is much greater, of course. So considering this context, the Inter-American Commission decided to start this project to get a cross-section view on cyber violence. When we started planning this guide, we saw that there were several challenges. First challenge is the lack of information and lack of statistics, and a bit of an archaic interpretation about a strict division between online and offline. It seems that online seems to sound or feel non-real or less serious. There was a lack of a concept agreed on international level. There's a lack of precise terminology, and we also identified while preparing this publication that there was also a gap between the women's organizations working on the field and those working digitally. And there's also a gender gap between women on internet and cybersecurity. That is why we decided to prepare this guide, which is available on our webpage of the OEA. The idea was to make it accessible and which would take into account all these challenges. And there's a lot of confusion about gender violence. So we work with designers to make it user-friendly, combining basic concepts with guidelines on cybersecurity. And this resulted in a very dynamic guide. You can see several examples on screen. And we also prepare a manual on the tools that this guide offers. So the basic starting point is that there's a continuum of violence. It's not an isolated phenomenon. It is localized in a social context, and now it exists as well online. We take up the concept of gender-based violence used by this special rapporteur of the UN, but we also try to break it down so that the readers could understand it at all levels. So we try to break it down into 5 elements. It's not new. It's not less serious. It means several violations of human rights. It is part of this continuum of violence that is expanding online, and it is also a change in violence. This report also refers to the different literature on the subject, and emphasis is made on the fact that, of course, it affects women, but it doesn't affect all of them in the same way. It's the kind of violence committed against an indigenous woman is not the same as the violence committed against a woman coming from an urban context. So we also list the implications of violence that we have seen in a recurrent manner. The guide also goes through the possible responsible factors, and we got inspiration as well from the European Union, because the responsible people always adopt male identity. Those committing acts of violence seem to have a male identity. They can be both known or unknown people, and the guide also puts emphasis on domestic violence. And there's also a section on the Internet of Things and how new technologies are making it easy for ex-partners to harass their former intimate partner. There is another section with a description of the typology of the different behaviors that can be considered violence against women. You can see them here on screen. So 12 types of aggression were identified. These are manifestations that are in constant change, and obviously technology is changing with technological transformation. So we try to list all the different behaviors so that they could be easily identified by women. For instance, the creation and distribution of intimate content. This is a risk that predominantly women face. I invite you to have a look at the list, which is as detailed as possible. And last but not least, the guide includes some regional progress, some regional advancements. Here you can see a map with the countries that have some sort of regulation on digital violence. Some of them in light green are already discussing the regulations. And the last part is a practical manual with recommendations, basic recommendations on digital security. To eliminate, to do away with this idea that cybersecurity is difficult. So I invite you to have a look as well. There are not only basic measures as password protection, but also some specific recommendations about sexting, also advice for women subject to violence, to domestic violence. And I would like to put emphasis on the fact that we emphasize that we are talking about experiences of different nature. Every experience is different, and women live violence differently. And based on that type of violence, an analysis is made. There are no magic formulas. There is no single package of measures. But we try to give some indications that can be adopted in several cases. And I'm close to the end. This is first effort from the CICTE in cooperation with the Inter-American Commission to join forces and combine the effort against online violence and gender gap, etc. And it is useful also outside the inter-American context, because it can be useful for many people, many women around the world, women that are victims of violence. I try to do a summary. I invite you to have a look at it, and I hope we can have the opportunity to go a bit into detail. Thanks very much.